Thank you and welcome to the first session of the Pacific Division Staff Services Confidence Building Series. We're planning weekly sessions through the month of June, and hopefully we can fit them all in before wildfire season begins here in the Pacific Division. My name is Susan Wananen, and I'll be your facilitator for much of this series. And our plan is to go mostly through the month of June. The goal for this series is to build confidence in your knowledge and skills, provide practical tips for working in staff services, and to provide a more collaborative environment for all of us to communicate. Our hope is that by the end, you'll feel more prepared the next time you deploy in your own region or elsewhere. They've been doing these series for a couple other activities, and maybe you've heard of people doing a mass care sheltering series or maybe external relations, and this is a series that's built very similarly to that. And the topics will be sent to you ahead of time, and you can choose to attend any or all of the series that appeal to you. We know that there are people on this call who have much experience in staff services, and we know some people who are attending maybe have never deployed in staff services and are just interested in learning a little bit more about it. Sherry, I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide, I think, or if you would, Sherry, if you could, thanks so much. So these are our main goals that we were thinking that we would be working on. We would like to build confidence in your knowledge and skills, discuss tasks required of a staff services worker, introduce improvements and new features in volunteer connection, share practical tips for working in staff services, provide an inclusive and collaborative environment to discuss topics important to our activity, and really to make you feel more prepared for your next deployment. We know that a lot of people haven't been able to go out in person for the last couple of years, and it's very different going out in person than it is virtually. But the nice thing about staffing is that you can go in person, or you can still respond virtually. Typically, a lot of staffing involves working on a computer, but there are roles in staffing where you are out and about. And so we feel like staffing is just a really good option for lots of people, especially if you like working with other volunteers. All right, next slide. Thanks, Sherry. We just have a couple of ground rule housekeeping tips, and we've all been on so many Teams calls the last couple of years. We kind of know these already, but if you could please mute yourself and turn off your camera when not speaking. That just kind of helps extend the bandwidth for everyone, and we just want to make sure that we have 84 people on this call right now, and we want to make sure that everybody has good connectivity. If you could ask questions and offer suggestions in chat, or raise your hand if you'd like to say something, we would love to hear from you. We really want this to feel like a safe place. So any question that you have, probably somebody else has it. So please feel free to write the question in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to do it that way.
Susan, I'm going to stop just for one moment. Sorry, this is Sherry, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but we have a message in chat that someone cannot see the screen. Can I get a thumbs up if most people are able to see the screen, or okay. So thank you so much. If you're not able to see this screen, please close out of Teams and go back into it and see if that resolves the issue. Sorry for the interruption, Susan.
No, that's good. It's so frustrating when you know that. And I'm glad that most people are able to see it. It's always hard when you're not able to see what everyone else is looking at. So to begin with, if you could please type your name and region in chat if you feel comfortable doing that. It's very interesting for us to know where everyone is from. And if you see a name that you recognize, please feel free to give a thumbs up or send an emoji. And it's always fun to see people that you have worked with before. If you happen to have a staff services gap already, go ahead and put that in there as well. It's certainly not required, but it's also interesting to know where people are coming from, the people who are on this call. And then also just one final note, and you've probably noticed this, that the sessions will be recorded, and we're going to provide transcription as well. And that's because we know 1 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, there's lots of meetings. A lot of people have other things going on. And so we are going to make sure that that's available to people who aren't able to attend the actual session. And I know that, like, for example, the sheltering series, they've moved their meetings around. Sometimes they're in the evening, sometimes in the afternoon. But for our planning purposes, it was easier just to set on one day and just be able to add that to calendars so that you know when it's going to be, and we'll just record everything. So real quick, I'm going to introduce myself. My name, again, is Susan Wananen, and I started with the Red Cross about 10 years ago in Minnesota, and now I live in Sacramento as part of the Gold Country region. And one huge change about living in California is that the disasters come to us. I am a volunteer, and my last deployment was as Workforce AD on the wildfires last fall in my own region. I'm the Workforce Engagement Lead for the division, and I'm also a mobilization manager for RMS, which is responsible for the recruitment and deployment of workers to all the disasters across the country. So one of my favorite things is getting people out to jobs, and that's certainly a fun part. And then I also like to go out in staffing myself. Next, I'd like to introduce Luke Beckman, who is the support and force behind this series. Luke, thanks again for your efforts to get these sessions going. Would you like to say a few words?
I will say as few words as I can. Good afternoon, everybody. Luke Beckman with the Pacific Division Disaster Team. My functional area for coverage is workforce, all things workforce. And we've learned over the last couple months some incredible things in the division with engaging our volunteers, our paid staff, and our whole workforce with these confidence builders. In the Pacific Division, we have the Mastermind series, which we're really focusing on our senior level leadership, those assistant directors, chiefs, directors. But we also want to make sure that we're supporting everybody who's brand new Red Crosser, or you've been with the Red Cross for a long time and you just shifted over to something else. So the service associate, the supervisor, the managers, and these capacity building series are really a way for all of us to collaborate together, learn about really interesting topics, and get ready to support the mission as we get into disaster season. So thank you for being on, and we will make sure all of these get posted to our YouTube channel so you can share with other teammates. And I think I'm going to throw it over to Roxy now, Susan.
Actually, thank you so much, Luke, for saying a few words. I'm going to, before we get started with today's topic and introduce Roxy, I'd also like to thank Sherry Lewis for sending out the introduction emails, setting up the group and calendar invitations, and who's already been helping today with technical issues and monitoring the chat. Sherry, would you like to say hello and a bit about yourself?
Hi, I'll just take a moment to say hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here and hope that you get as much out of it as you're hoping to. Please give us feedback, share with you what is working and what is not working throughout the series so that we can modify it and develop it, because this is for you, all of the participants on the call. So thank you again for joining. Please raise your hand or reach out in chat if you're having any technical issues at all. I'm also going to put my cell phone number in chat, so if for some reason you cannot access chat later or raise your hand, you can send me a text message. So thank you again for joining.
Thanks very much, Sherry. So first of all, I have to say I love staff services because we get a chance to work with every volunteer. For example, Sherry usually deploys in external relations, and so it's like staffing gets to touch a little bit of every activity on the job, and providing good customer care to the workers, then they're able to care for the clients. And like I said before, there are so many options within staffing as far as whether you work virtually or on the ground, on the computer, or out greeting volunteers. So I'm very excited for this series and happy that so many of you could join us today. We have a very special guest presenter today who not only knows all the answers to staffing questions, but provides them in a very kind and patient manner. I'd like to introduce Roxy Trudeau, who's a manager on the national staffing team. Roxy, it's all yours.
Hi, thank you, Susan. Hi. Oh, I'm so excited to be here for so many reasons. One main reason is that I'm just so impressed with all of the work that's happening in the Pacific Division around capacity building and building enthusiasm and getting people ready for wildfire season that's coming and hurricane season and just all the other needs that pop up for us throughout the year. So very cool work that's happening. I love being a part of anything you all are doing. So today I'm going to give you just a little bit of an overview of the staff services unit, kind of to kick off this series, and definitely for those of you who are newer to staff services, I'll go into some detail about that. But a lot of this is going to be more overview. So I don't think we'll have enough time for specific questions, but you can always reach out to me. Also, Susan, and you've got great resources with Patrice Baxter in your division. So there are people there to support you and answer your technical questions. So I'm going to start today by just talking a little bit, and then I'll share some slides to go into some technical details. So me, I now work at National Headquarters. I'm part of the unit that supports disaster staff services on DROs. So you're going to hear me say staff services and workforce. We're at kind of a funny time right now where historically we called our unit staff services. And you can imagine that could be misleading. It's not the most detailed, it's not the most specific in detail, because staff, I think for some people, conjures ideas of paid staff, when in fact over 90% of our workers are volunteers. And so I think the term workforce definitely is much more all-encompassing of both paid and volunteer. I think any of you who've been on a DRO or in your region, you know that when you're out there, you can't tell the difference between who's paid and who's not, nor does it matter. It does not affect where you're at on your team or who's reporting to who. So we really want to be really thoughtful about our language and being inclusive. So you'll hear us say staff services because that's what the unit has been called. We are shifting. We're kind of going in the direction of calling it workforce. Right now, we're kind of in this in between where we say both. The head of the unit, and you'll see this when we look at the table of organization shortly, that title is the Operations Management Workforce Assistant Director. And then the staff services team under them all have staff services titles, but that's all the same unit. But it can get confusing. So I want to point that out now. We'll talk about it again later. So my job is to support all of you when you're deployed in staff services, and to help get everyone ready, and also sort of this larger role of really thinking about how do we care for our workers when they're deployed. And caring for them means meeting their basic needs, like food and a place to sleep, but it's also making sure they're doing meaningful work, that we're being thoughtful about that donated dollar and using it well with the way we're spending funds for our workers to be deployed. So we want to be efficient and effective, and we want to make sure our workers are having a good experience. You know, of course, they're going into a disaster zone where they're faced with tragedy and working with clients who've really gone through something significant, and it's really hard for our workers to bear witness to oftentimes. But there's also so much meaning in being able to serve in that way, and we want that to be a meaningful experience for them and give them all the resources and support they need to be able to do it effectively and to meet our mission. So that's my role. My background, you know, I started in disaster response more largely, not with the Red Cross, but with a different organization on Hurricane Katrina. But I was out there in the field in Louisiana, and I was wearing a different colored vest, and I could see across the way all the Red Crossers, and they were doing such cool work. And I was just so inspired that leaving Louisiana at the end of my time there, I really committed to become a volunteer with the Red Cross instead. And so flash forward then in 2009, I was in Chicago and I became a volunteer with the disaster action team and served as a volunteer for a few years. And then when Hurricane Sandy happened, I deployed as a volunteer and came back and took a paid position with the Chicago region as a disaster program manager. Now I say all that to say that then that first week I started as a paid employee as a disaster program manager. We had a level 4 flood happen in Chicago, and the director of disaster in that region turned to me and said, "You're in charge of staff services, go set up your unit." And I said, "What's staff services?" And so I imagine that might be the case for many of you, that how you found yourself here, talking about staff services today is because you've found yourself in that role out of necessity. Sometimes it's not necessarily that you sought it out, but you got tapped at your regional level. Maybe there's a local multifamily fire or an opportunity to deploy out in that role. But sort of sometimes it just happens to us. And especially I think if you have been seen in any way as someone who it could be a good fit for helping take care of others and sort of have a strategic eye for how to do that. Others might seek you out for the role as well. And knowing the people on this call, I can definitely say that for everyone I know. So, you know, why is it important for us to take care of our workers? I mean, I don't think we necessarily need to go deep into that because I think you all know, but I really want to point out just how incredible it is and how resilient our workers are and how meaningful it is to be able to work with them. We as the staff services unit takes care of our workers so they can take care of our clients and serve the mission. And we have lots of different roles like that on a DR where it's more, you know, the kind of the back room work that needs to be done. You know, our unit is responsible for maintaining the system of record, which is Volunteer Connection. So we know where our workers are. We can access them if we need to. We can get hold of them if there's an emergency. We have that record for them once they go home to help them get promotions. We're figuring out how to move them around and making sure they have lodging. You know, so all that work that happens to be able to ensure that those workers who are on a DRO who are working directly with our clients have everything that they need to be able to be present and focused and compassionate and serve the people sitting in front of them. And so it's really meaningful work, I think, to be able to take care of our workers because also our workers are just so cool. It takes a special person, I think, to both be attracted to the work that we all do and then to figure out if it actually makes sense for them or not. So I think my favorite Red Cross joke is, the timeless joke of seeing a glass of water and it has a half a glass of water in it. And an optimist would see that glass and say it's a glass half full. And a pessimist would see it and say it's a glass half empty. Well, Red Crossers, when they see that half a glass of water, would think, I think I can bathe in that. So, and I love that because I think it captures just how innovative our workers can be and creative and problem solving. And also they really can sort of put up with a lot. We deploy them into places with little notice. They have very few hours often to pack. They're not really sure where they're headed or what the details are going to be or where they're sleeping or exactly where they're eating. And so we really ask a lot of them. And so I want us to always hold close to our hearts exactly what it means. And for us too, but the sacrifices that happen for a worker to be on our operations and doing what they're doing. I want to mention that too, because I think particularly in staff services, when you're a worker on this unit, often what comes your direction are the things that are not working. So maybe that's a worker misused funds on their mission card, which is the credit card we give them for meals and incidentals to take care of them while they're deployed. Two workers are arguing. Someone isn't getting along with their supervisor. You know, these are issues that pop up and they come to us in our unit. And I think sometimes it's easy for it to start to feel like there's issues for all of our workers, like nothing is working, because we often don't necessarily hear the beautiful stories, of which there are so many, or the times where a worker just has a pretty normal deployment and everything went well, nothing to speak of. You often don't hear those. We hear the issues that pop up. So I think sometimes it can be easy to sort of become jaded around that too. So I want to just challenge you all to continue to ground yourself in remembering that, you know, inherently we trust our workers. The vast majority of workers are trying to do the right thing and they're trying to follow our procedures. And often if a procedure is not followed, it's not so because the worker did something wrong, but perhaps we did not communicate it clearly enough. So always assuming noble intent from our people, it really goes a long way. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides now and jump into some additional detail. I'm assuming you can all see that, but someone just holler if not. And Susan, I'll defer to you to monitor the chat because I can no longer see it. So
that's good.
Before I jump into our unit, I just want to bring up swarm leadership. So this is a concept that we've really adopted in disaster cycle services in the Red Cross, and it came out of a lot of the coordinated efforts with the emergency management community in the moments after the Boston Marathon bombing. And so the work that happened to coordinate that response was studied by Harvard and some other institutions, and they identified these key concepts that really led to the success of these different teams working together. And so these are concepts that we really hold close to our hearts as well in the Red Cross. So unity of mission, generosity of spirit, no ego, no blame, stay in your lane and help others in theirs, and a foundation of trusted relationships. So I think often when I find for myself, when I'm kind of losing my way or I'm getting too in the weeds, returning to these really is grounding and helps refocus on the mission. And you'll see these come up at other moments. So I want to jump in to talk about worker experience, because I think this really helps then as we're getting into what the table of organization looks like in the unit and what people's roles are in that unit and how we support our workers. I think thinking about the care of our workers from the time they get recruited and they leave their home to the time they return to their home after their deployment, there's so many different steps along the way and so many different opportunities we have to anticipate their needs and meet those needs, or potentially for things to go awry and it could really impact or ruin their experience. So for example, a worker first gets recruited, they're at their home, they're contacted. Let's say if this is for a national operation, and so we're recruiting from across the country. If you get called at your home to go to Louisiana to respond, you probably have a lot of questions about what's the weather there? What should you pack? What will you be doing? Will you be sleeping in a staff shelter or in a hotel? Will there be access to food you can eat? Maybe you have a dietary restriction. All sorts of questions that you would have. And often we don't necessarily have the answers to all of them or many of them. And so I think that we really prepare our workers to understand they have to be flexible and they don't necessarily get a lot of information in the beginning. But there are definitely ways that we can do a better job as well. Our goal is not to just say, well, we don't know, you have to be flexible. You'll see when you get there. Some of that information we can do a better job of helping funnel from the operation back to that recruiting region and to the worker. And so it's something to always be thinking about, is how can we better prepare those workers? And then, once they've decided they're going to accept the assignment for that DRO, they receive a DRIS, and that's the Disaster Response Information System. That's what it stands for, message. So they receive these messages that tell them more specific details about what is going to happen when they arrive. So the message might say something like, if you arrive before 6 p.m. in New Orleans, please go to the Avis rental car counter, pick up a car, and travel to this location, which is the headquarters, and you'll check in there. So very basic, but I will tell you, this is probably one of the things that is easiest to mess up with information and can so drastically impact a worker's experience. For example, I was just, a couple of years ago in North Carolina, I was deployed and received my address, and the address was written as, I think, Avenue, and it was supposed to be street. So GPS sent me to like an abandoned field in the middle of nowhere. And I was able to figure it out. But if that was my first deployment as a brand new volunteer, I think that and let's say maybe my flight got canceled, I got stranded at Atlanta airport overnight, all sorts of things that happen to our workers. This is one more way that we could just be a little more thoughtful to ensure that the workers' experience is one where we get them where they need to be as much as we have within our power. Like I said, traveling to the DR, lots of things can go wrong. We have systems in place for if a worker get stranded somewhere, we need to get them a hotel overnight somewhere besides at the location of the DRO. But I think that a lot of that, there's an opportunity for us to work hand in hand with the region they're coming from, with the DR, and with RMS, Resource Mobilization Support, which is the team that helps get them to the operation. So I think if we have this coordinated effort of communication, that worker won't feel alone, and that's so key. And then when they are in process, we've put a lot of focus in the last few years specifically around this experience of, if we have a headquarters set up in an office and a worker arrives, it's a very big difference in you arrive and there's a clear sign of where to go. It says welcome, here, put your bags here. Here's water, here's snacks, here's the bathroom. So meeting your basic needs before you go and check in. So that's a very different experience than perhaps you arrive in the parking lot and you're not quite sure even what door to go into. Nothing seems marked. You try a front door and it's locked. So you're kind of scratching your head trying to figure out what to do next. Or maybe then you get into the building and you go to check in and that staff services person who's typically the first to greet you, maybe you can't actually even find where they're at. You see a lot of other units, but you can't find staff services. Or you find staff services and the person who greets you is maybe sitting behind a desk typing on their computer and they don't notice you. These are all little details that make a huge difference for those workers as they're arriving. So we're really, we're continuing to, and we have over the last several years, really try to put some focus on strategic structuring of the space as workers come in to ensure that we are anticipating their needs. And that's the other thing is, we do these DROs all the time and each one is very different, but there's some clear themes that we are well aware of. Things like we know that on many operations, workers are, if there's an issue, the common things that people are complaining about are that there was not good communication. So they weren't necessarily clear on what was going on or where they should be. And the other is just not feeling like their supervisor was had the experience and training to be effective in their job. So those are two big things that we know if that's often an issue, we can really try to get ahead of. And within staff services, some of what I'm talking about is where we have impact. So are we communicating really clearly where a worker is supposed to go when they arrive, what to do with their bags when they get there? Are they supposed to go to their hotel or come check in at headquarters first? So all things that I want you all as you're deployed and you're serving in these roles to be trying to anticipate. So what will those workers need and what can I do to meet those needs even before they have to ask? And then continuing on, yeah, Susan.
Hi, we have one hand up. Do you mind taking a question right in the middle here?
Go ahead.
Narita? Narita, are you able to come off mute? And if not, you could put the question in chat too, and that would work. Roxy, why don't we go ahead and continue and then we can come back.
Not a problem. So yeah, and then the worker, typically it's a 2-week assignment, so that can be affected by lots of different things. So while they're working, we hope that they have connected with their supervisor, they know what's going on, but there's lots of things that can go wrong at that stage as well, such as, if staff services needs to change the worker's lodging location several times. That's something else we see is one way to really make it difficult for a worker to be effective in their role is if we are messing with where they're going to sleep at night. Not surprising, right? People want to know where they're going to sleep. Typically, our workers tend to prefer to stay in the same place. Even if we give them the option of, hey, you're staying in this hotel right now, there's actually a nicer hotel that opened up. They would often opt to just stay where they are versus move. So that's really informative, and also whenever we have the opportunity, we try to give them the choice if we can, because we know there's a lot of factors at play. Workers also prefer to sleep as close as possible to their work location. We already know that. So if we're looking on a map and we see the people who have to really travel far to get from work to their lodging, that's another area we can anticipate that would be hard for them, and see if there's anything we can do to improve that. And then as they're going home, we want them to get a worker evaluation. We know that lots of workers don't get one, and that's something that we continue to put some energy towards. How can we improve that? But we all have a role to play. If you're supervising someone, you have a responsibility to write those evaluations, or as a worker, you have the right to ask for that. So we really want to help support a culture where we take those very seriously. And then, I think for so many of our workers, they're deployed for a couple weeks. There's a lot of adrenaline. There's a lot of excitement. It's really, it takes an emotional toll. It's such a different life from their home life. So as they're leaving that operation, it can be kind of difficult to transition off. It all just feels like it abruptly stops, and suddenly you're getting on a plane, you're getting in a car and heading home. So I think whatever we can do to really ensure that we're thanking our workers appropriately, we're giving the time to them to really acknowledge what they did. So we really, in our staff services unit, whoever that person is who's designated to sit at that desk when people are out processing and out process them, we've really tried to have that person, set the laptop aside, give people eye contact, really spend some dedicated time talking and letting them do some processing with us. Because it really goes a long way. Even if a worker had maybe a less than ideal experience, for them to just say to someone like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what happened. I had to drive an hour this way, and then I got there and they told me it was the wrong location and I had to go back. Sort of being able to kind of process that. Often then they leave feeling pretty good, even if it was not ideal. So we have such a role to play in being able to support them emotionally as well. I want to now jump into specifics about the unit. And if you've been around for a little while, this table of organization in our unit changed over the last few years. And we are an organization that I think does a really great job of focusing on continuous improvement and best practice when it comes to, I think, disaster operations is a moving target, because we learn something new on every operation. Things are changing, communities are changing, technology. So I think sometimes it can feel frustrating in the Red Cross to feel like things are changing all the time. And I feel for anyone who feels that way. I mean, it is very much true that we have a lot of change. But I also challenge anyone to to think about the benefit of that change and that evolution, because we're continuously learning. Sometimes we go back to things that we did in the past, so it feels like perhaps you're like, wait a second, I remember 10 years ago we had this same idea. But I think just having the grace with each other and that generosity of spirit and to really support an environment where we can continue to try to learn and grow together. And so this unit, so that orange director box, that's the DRO director. And so, as I mentioned, we have a position which is within the leadership on a DR. So within operations management, we have a workforce assistant director. So that workforce AD, or written out, it's WF/AD. They oversee the staff services unit. Sometimes on a larger operation, we would assign them a deputy AD, if that makes sense. We don't do that very often, but on the big, like the level 6 and 7 DROs, we may do that. And then under that workforce AD, you've got SPS, which is staff planning and support. That's the real kind of technical role of figuring out where our people are, tracking them, making sure their basic needs are met, making sure our system of record and volunteer connection is accurate. And then going across staff relations, which is the team that really helps ensure that there's proactive problem solving happening for our workers if there's any issues, such as maybe a worker not getting along with their supervisor or struggling with their lodging assignment, or maybe just kind of feeling confused and trying to figure out what to do next. Maybe it's something about the assignment is not a good fit. And there's a lot of cool things that have happened within the staff relations unit that I'll talk about shortly. They've made some big changes with their tools. And then we have the training unit. So the idea here is, on a DRO, there's such an opportunity to provide just-in-time training for any of our workers. So, for example, sometimes we deploy a bunch of workers to do mass care sheltering, so to be working in our shelters with our clients. And once they're there, we realize we don't need all of those mass care sheltering workers. So it might be an opportunity to train people really quickly in doing damage assessment or doing distribution of emergency supplies. So two other needs that tend to come up pretty quickly as well. So we have an ability to train people, and more we're using technology and doing that virtually, which is pretty cool, because that really opens up the kinds of trainings we can offer, who is training, if they can do it by video. And then EBV, we're calling this actually DEBV now. So that's the disaster event-based volunteers, meaning the people who are living in the communities that are affected by disasters, and they raise their hand and they say, I want to help. So they walk in kind of fresh off the street. They were not previously affiliated with the Red Cross, and we find a way to get them trained up quickly and integrated. And really, this is a best practice, and this is something we really strive for, is as much as possible, those disaster operations are staffed by and led by people from the communities that are impacted. Our communities we serve know their needs better than anyone, and they're going to be the ones there after we leave. And so as much as we can, our goal is not to fly people in from all over the country to an operation to work it, though we often need to because of technical expertise. We've got a well-trained workforce and we want to use them. But really the first goal is, as much as we can recruit locally from those affected communities, we try to do that. And then those green boxes. So within the staff planning and support function, you've got local community volunteers, LCV. So this is different than the EBVs. So these are the local volunteers and paid staff who were previously affiliated with Red Cross before the DRO stood up. So they're already affiliated, but they're different than when we deploy in workers, because when we deploy them in from outside, typically, if you're going to get on a plane and fly to New Orleans to work on an operation, there's an expectation that you're working 6 days a week, you have 1 day off, and that might be a 10 or 12-hour day. That's very different than, let's say, an DRO stands up in your backyard. You still have to go to your day job, you still have family responsibilities, so you might not be able to do that sort of schedule. You might be able to say, hey, I can work 3 hours tomorrow, and then this weekend I can do 8 hours, and maybe next week I can help as well. So whatever you can give is meaningful, and we want to use someone's time effectively, but it's just a different way to schedule and plan around that kind of a local worker than someone we've deployed in. And then under SPS as well is lodging. So our staff lodging I'll get into later. It's always a hot topic. There's a lot to it. And then also we have an ambassador program, which is something we're really proud of, that we created just in the last few years to improve the experience of workers arriving on an operation by having people who are branded with Red Cross gear to welcome them and help direct them to where they're going. So I mentioned lodging, and I want to talk about an opportunity. So part of our lodging system is that we have a virtual lodging team. So we've done a lot of improvements to our lodging over the last few years, and our number one goal when we are lodging workers on an operation is that we want them in corporate lodging. And what we mean by that is in hotels or motels. And that's always our first priority. And that's because of the comfort of our workers. And so we are never is it that our first priority is getting people into a staff shelter. Now, with that said, sometimes we do need to open staff shelters because the locations of our operations are often in places where perhaps there was limited hotels to begin with, or now the hotels are full of clients, which we of course want them to get priority for those rooms. Or we're deploying into a place where lots of other services are deploying in as well, other nonprofits, government entities, utility companies. So we're not the only ones trying to grab those hotel rooms. So for all those reasons, we might have to open a staff shelter. So I have two pictures up here that I want to show you. So on the left, there are those green cots. That's sometimes what our staff shelters look like. Although I'll say during kind of COVID era, we've really tried hard to spread those cots out more. So this is pre-COVID. But we've moved to a direction of more of the picture on the right where we've really tried to improve what those staff shelters look like. So we've in the last couple operations, we've had to open staff shelters. We got these tents. We got tarps to put around the tents to provide privacy. We ran extension cords so people have power to charge their cell phones in their tent area. And this all came out of a lot of feedback that we sought out from our workers to say, hey, what would make it a little bit more comfortable if you're in a staff shelter? So we're excited about that direction because and we're getting rave reviews about the new shelters. And I don't say that to like pat us on the back necessarily. I think it's just, it feels like such a win if there's anything we can do to improve a worker's lodging experience. So this is, I think, just a point of pride for everyone who's been working on it. But as I mentioned, there's also an opportunity if you wanted to get more involved in staff services outside of deployment. So part of how we support lodging, and lodging is very complicated. We have a virtual lodging team. So what they do is there's actually, I think there's about 80 people on this team, and they're trained up as experts in how to obtain lodging and track lodging for our DROs. And so that's something, you know, what we kind of figured out is it doesn't make sense to deploy someone to do lodging on a DRO, and it's such a technical skill, and maybe they haven't done it in a year. So you get on an operation this year, and it's kind of hard to remember what you're supposed to do because it's not fresh, and it can be very stressful. And so what we figured out is, you know, let's bring together those people who do lodging. Let's make this virtual team, and then let's have them continuously support operations. So they're getting the experience, they're fresh, and we've got that expertise over and over. So whoever's supporting your DRO with lodging today was just supporting another DRO maybe a month ago. So it's leveraging our expertise. And so, and it's taking away from us needing to try to recruit people, and sometimes people would get thrown into the role and not very comfortable with it. So if lodging is something you're interested in, I think we have this really cool opportunity where you can join that virtual lodging team now and maybe jump on an operation virtually to support. The other opportunity I want to mention in the program, I brought up the ambassador program. So we launched this just a couple years ago. That picture in the middle is with Gail McGovern, she's the head of the Red Cross, for some of you who know that. And it just happened to be that the first DRO that we were testing the ambassador program, and the very first day, those two people with her in those blue shirts, they were our brand new first ambassadors we were trying at the airport. So we got these blue shirts, so they'd stand out a little bit differently than other Red Cross gear. And we put these smiling faces at the airports to greet people as they arrived. They give them a bottle of water, help direct them to where they needed to go next, answer any questions. They had, you know, a few snacks with them. So just kind of that welcoming committee. You'll see, and I'm sure some of you on the phone were involved in this, but on the left, I think this was Sacramento actually. Some of the ambassadors figured out printing out people's names and holding the signs up with their names as workers arrived, which our workers loved. They thought that was so cool. So what a great way to impact someone's experience as they're arriving, is giving them that warm welcome and helping them get to where they need to go. And so this has really provided an intervention at a point in workers deployment that we just found people were kind of slipping through the cracks. Next sessions, you're going to go more deeply into a lot of the activities within the staffing unit. But I want to bring this up because I think that staff relations historically was sort of seen as, I don't know, maybe like the police on an operation, or people that you did not want to involve. I think some of the people on the phone are actually in this picture, which is pretty cool. But I think what we really want to help shift culture around the use of staff relations, where we want people to see staff relations as a tool. It's helping our workers be successful and have a good experience, and it's helping problem solve well before a problem gets bigger. And so much of what staff relations is doing now, and part of their core principles, are really just about building rapport, observing what's going on, communicating to who needs to be involved, maybe helping coach, and then document anything that needs to be documented. And so it's not about people getting in trouble, but it's really about trying to help set people up for success in their deployments. So I hope for all of you as well that you can help promote more of that culture, and we can really use staff relations as a tool. And then something else I just want to mention, I know we're kind of getting low on time. So something else, another tool we've created over the last few years to help support our worker experience is something called a pulse check survey. So this really came out of a commitment we had made in our concept of operations, which is a document we have that you can find on the Exchange, and it really spells out how we operate on our operations. And we had spelled out in there specifically about how we want our workers treated with respect and fairness, and we want them to have a job to do, the training they need to do that job. They need a supervisor so they know who to go to, and they're getting direction. They need a safe, clean place to sleep, and then a way to get to work. And so these are kind of baseline commitments we were making and goals for ourselves to ensure that a worker might not love where they're sleeping at night, but let's make sure it's clean and safe, for example. So we created a pulse check survey, which is just a text message workers receive on their DRO, where it's a 30-second survey to ask them these basic questions. What it looks like. So if the worker is receiving this text, this is what it looks like, where it says, welcome to DR 123 pulse check. And then it asks them the question, do you have a job to do? They say yes. The next question pops up like a conversation. So do you have the training you need to do your job effectively? And so on. And so they can answer these questions. And then we receive this back in the staff services unit. It's anonymous. So we can, again, it's just a pulse check of the operation. It would not give us specific information to drill down to see who said what. But this gives us a sense of like, hey, if a high number of people are saying they don't have a clean, safe place to sleep, what's going on? What can we do to affect change and solve that problem for our workers now? So this has been a very useful tool for us. And it's something that we can turn on for any DR. We tend to use it for the larger ones, but it's a conversation you can always have with your team and with me of if it's something you wanted to use as a tool. So it's available to you. And then just to wrap up, and then I'll open up for more questions. So if you're thinking right now, wow, I love staff services so much that I want to do even more and get involved and build my experience, I just want to make some recommendations. So one thing, of course, is the best way to get experience is to be able to deploy. It does not have to be in person. There are, like Susan said, there's lots of virtual options out there. But there's also those opportunities I mentioned where maybe you like a technical challenge, and maybe you were good at puzzles or Tetris when you were younger. So maybe joining the virtual lodging team would be a good fit for you. And also, I think one of the best ways to really build your staff services skills is to get really comfortable with volunteer connection, which I think the best way to do that is just through your region. There's all sorts of tasks locally that you could get involved with that really build those skills and volunteer connection to understand how to use it well. We have a lot of enhancements coming to Volunteer Connection right now, which are all very exciting, and hopefully better use automation to cut down on some of the manual work we do. Some things that help communicate with our workers better, which is going to be great. There's a new responder app that has a help feature. So a worker can hit that help and type a quick message, and it gets shot right over to staff services so they can see it and try and help that worker. So we have some really cool things rolling out, and the best way to get comfortable with those is just getting that experience. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll turn it over to Susan as moderator, but I definitely want to open up for questions.
Thank you, Roxy. That was amazing. That was a lot to cover, and you really were able to tie it all up. That was amazing. So just a couple of questions. One was about the ambassador program, and that is whether you need a staffing gap to be an ambassador.
Great question. So in terms of a gap, it's a specialty track we have, so you can do some quick training and get that specialty added to your profile. But with that said, the ambassador program, I mean, one of the things I love the most about it is anyone with the right personality can kind of be pulled off the street and serve very effectively as an ambassador. And I would say it's almost more powerful, you know, as workers are arriving at a location, for there to be locals standing there saying, welcome, here, let me help you get around. Let me tell you where to go. It's meaningful for that local worker to be able to greet these people who are coming from all over the country to help their community. There's a lot more depth to that experience. So this is great for disaster EBVs, but anyone can really be an ambassador. And we're also really trying to find creative other spaces for people to serve. And what I mean by that is, you know, it's really easy to set ambassadors up at airports to greet people. But I think another really effective location is, like, let's say we have a staff shelter stood up and a couple hundred people are staying there. Putting an ambassador at the front door in the morning as everyone's kind of leaving, just to high five them, to say, hey, do you know what car you're getting into to go to your work location? Do you know your work location? Do you know your supervisor? What do you need? How can I help you? Is really great to just problem solve for people. So be thinking about that, of where's those areas of high traffic that our workers are kind of coming and going, and just, you know, sticking somebody there with the right personality to really just kind of to be that catching people who are slipping through the cracks.
I have to say, so I was on the ambassador team for Campfire, and those pictures that you have in that slide, those were some of the teammates. And it was one of those jobs where people would come down the escalator, you know, and they would see their name on the sign that we were holding up, and they were so excited to see their name. And then they wanted to be part of that job. They were like, how can I be an ambassador? So everybody who was greeted kind of wanted to be part of it. And I felt like it really created a positive atmosphere on that really big DR. So that was super fun. Yeah. So one other question came in about the virtual lodging team and who they should contact. And there was a couple ideas, either Carl or Gwen. Do you have a recommendation?
If you're interested in joining that team, you know, you could contact me just because my contact information is there. That would be fine. But Carl Gingrich is he's a volunteer who oversees the virtual lodging team. So he's a great person to reach out to as well. But also you can always email disaster.staffing if you don't know who to go to. So that's the box that our whole team keeps an eye on. So we can always direct whatever your message is to the appropriate person. So feel free, when in doubt, to use disaster.staffing@redcross.org.
Thank you for bringing that up, actually. Can you tell us the difference between disaster.staffing and disaster staffing center?
I saw Sherry put disaster.staffing in the chat. If you could put disaster staffing center as well. Yes, so we've often talked about changing the titles because it's so confusing for people, understandably. So disaster.staffing is my team, the people who are supporting the staff services unit on an operation. And so it's really about the workers who are already at the DRO. So once they're on the ground, we are the team who's taking care of them. RMS, which we work very closely with, so the Resource Mobilization Support Unit, there's one RMS person for each division, and their job is to get workers to the operation. So they are communicating with the operation about what the need is. They're going out and helping recruit, and then they're figuring out how to get those workers there. So Disaster Staffing Center is the RMS team's box. And so you can kind of think of it as if someone's if it's related to workers en route, it's Disaster Staffing Center. If they're already there, it's disaster.staffing. But I will say people send things to the wrong box all the time, and we are very comfortable with just forwarding it on as needed. So I don't want anyone too stressed about using the wrong one.
Great, thank you. I just had one more question. You mentioned the enhancements, you know, in the new app. Is there going to be training for those coming up?
Yeah, so so each division is starting to do trainings. We held some overviews for some staff services supervisors recently. We're going to continue to do that. But I would say that's all great to get some exposure. I think the best way to learn about it is on your next deployment, and we are definitely hand-holding people through their first deployment using the new systems. Though what I'm hoping that you see when you use it is how intuitive and easy the new systems are. So it's things like I mentioned, you know, on this responder app, it's not a new app. It's the same old volunteer connection app that many of you probably already have. If you don't, you can go download it now. So in that app, we've created an enhancement specific to workers who are deploying. So at the point for which you get assigned to an operation, your Volunteer Connection app changes and it gives you information about your assignment. And then once you get checked in, it changes again and it gives you specific information about where your lodging is, who's your supervisor, what's their contact information, which I think is so cool that you've got their phone number and their email address right there in your phone without any effort. It has a map, so where your lodging is in relation to your work location. Like I said, it has the ability to ask for help. So lots of great tools. If you're a supervisor, it gives you a roster of everyone who you're supervising and contact information for them. So really great tool. It's going to be released here in the next couple weeks. We're just working out some final tweaks for it, but it's really going to make a big difference, and I'm hoping everyone's getting really excited.
Thanks, Roxy. And actually, that was kind of a trick question because we've got people coming on in later sessions to talk about both like the daily check-in as well as the new app. And so thank you for the overview. It'll be great to have. I think we're having Nina come on a little bit later, and maybe Paul talking about some of those, and Julie talking about some of those new features. So we're excited about that. And we're so grateful that you came on today to kick us off. You know, we're just really thankful that you were able to join us and give us all this information. And if we did put up all our contact information, and so if you have questions related to anything that Roxy talked about today or questions that come up later, please feel free to email any of us on that list. We're running out of time, so we're going to wrap up now. And I do want to suggest that you report your hours for these sessions. Our next session is next Thursday, April 14th at 1 p.m. And we'll be discussing what to expect in the first 24 hours after a disaster hits your region. Peggy Pinerbasi I'm sorry, I'll put on my camera. Peggy Pinerbasi from NCCR will be leading our session next week. So we're very excited about that. And just really thank you so much for attending. We hope to see you next week. And thanks again, Roxy, for presenting. Have a great afternoon, everyone.